The temperature outside was -22 degrees Celsius. I know that because I checked my phone the moment I heard the doorbell ring at 6:15 inches the morning. I wasn't expecting anyone. I lived alone in my apartment in Mississauga, a 2-bedroom place I'd been renting for 3 years. My neighbors were quiet. My street was quiet. Nothing ever happened at 6:15 inches the morning on a Tuesday in February. I opened the door, and my grandmother was standing on my doorstep, in her house slippers. She had a garbage bag in each hand. Not suitcases, garbage bags. The kind you use for leaves in the fall. She was wearing her winter coat, but it wasn't buttoned up properly. The left side was higher than the right, like someone had helped her put it on in a hurry, or hadn't helped her at all. Her hair wasn't done. She was shaking. She looked up at me and said, "I'm sorry to bother you, sweetheart. I didn't know where else to go." I pulled her inside immediately. I didn't ask questions yet. I just got her to the couch, took her coat off, wrapped her in the blanket I kept on the armchair, and put the kettle on. Her hands were ice cold. She'd been outside long enough that the cold had gotten all the way through her. While the kettle was heating, I looked out my front window. The street was empty. No car pulling away. No headlights. Nothing. My uncle had dropped her off and left before she even rang the bell. My grandmother's name is Dorothy. She's 82 years old. She was born in Hamilton, Ontario, raised 4 children, buried a husband, and spent 40 years working as a seamstress before she retired. She is one of the sharpest people I know. She does the crossword in pen. She remembers everyone's birthday without writing it down. She calls me every Sunday at 7 p.m., and she has never once missed that call in the 10 years I've been living away from home. She is not someone who shows up at your door at 6 a.m. with her belongings in garbage bags, unless something has gone very, very wrong. I brought her the tea and sat down beside her and waited. She wrapped both hands around the mug. She didn't speak right away. I let her take her time. Finally, she said, "Your uncle told me last night that I have 30 days to find somewhere else to live." I kept my face still. I asked her if she wanted to tell me what happened. She said she didn't fully understand what had happened. She said things had been tense for a while. She said my uncle's wife had stopped speaking to her directly about 2 months ago. She said there had been a disagreement about some paperwork, and after that things were never the same. I asked what kind of paperwork. She looked down at her mug. She said, "He asked me to sign some things. For the house. I don't know exactly what they were. He said it was just to make things simpler." I asked when this was. She said it was about 14 months ago. I didn't say anything for a moment. I just sat with that. My grandmother had been living with my uncle since my grandfather passed away 7 years ago. My uncle, my mother's brother, had offered. He said it made sense. He had the space, he had the house in Brampton, and my grandmother didn't drive. My mother had agreed it was the right arrangement. My grandmother had sold her condo in Hamilton and moved in. At the time, I was 22 and just starting my first job. I didn't have an opinion anyone was asking for, but I remembered being at family dinners over the years and noticing small things. The way my uncle's wife would answer questions directed at my grandmother. The way my uncle would refer to the house in a way that always made it sound like only his house, never theirs. The way my grandmother, who had always been the kind of woman who held a room, had gotten quieter over the years, smaller somehow. I had noticed. I hadn't said anything. That was something I would have to sit with later. That morning I made my grandmother breakfast and told her she was staying with me. I called in to work and said I had a family emergency, which was true. Then I sat down at my kitchen table with a notepad and I started asking careful questions. Over the next 2 hours, I learned the following. 14 months ago, my uncle had asked my grandmother to sign documents transferring the house in Brampton into a joint tenancy arrangement with right of survivorship, meaning if my grandmother died, the house would pass directly to my uncle without going through probate. My grandmother had not had an independent lawyer review these documents before signing. My uncle had told her it was routine, that it was just to protect her, that it was what everyone did. What my uncle did not tell her was that the house had originally been purchased partly with money from my grandmother's condo sale. When she had sold her Hamilton condo, she had contributed $160,000 toward the Brampton house. This was understood within the family as her contribution toward her own living situation. There was nothing in writing. There was no formal agreement. It was a family arrangement based on trust. The $160,000 was gone. The equity arrangement it represented was gone. And my grandmother had signed documents that made it significantly harder to claim any of it back. I kept my voice calm while she told me this. I wrote everything down. Then she told me something else. She said that for the last 2 years, she had been giving my uncle $900 a month from her OAS and CPP payments to help with household expenses. He had said it was for groceries and utilities. She had agreed because she wanted to contribute. She had been doing this by signing checks, which my uncle would then deposit. She didn't have records of these checks. She didn't have statements showing what happened to the money. She had simply trusted her son. $900 a month for 24 months is $21,600. On top of the $160,000, I put my pen down and looked at my grandmother. She was looking at me with this expression I'd never seen on her before, not afraid exactly, but ashamed, like she was waiting for me to be disappointed in her. I reached across the table and held her hand. I told her she had done nothing wrong. I told her that people who are supposed to protect us sometimes don't, and that is never the fault of the person who trusted. She nodded. She pressed her lips together. She didn't cry, but it was close. I told her I was going to take care of this. I want to be honest about what the next few weeks looked like, because it wasn't a movie. It wasn't clean or fast. There were days I second-guessed myself. There were nights I lay awake, wondering if I was doing the right thing, if I was going to destroy the family over something that was essentially a civil matter, if my grandmother would ultimately be happier, if I just let it go and focused on making her comfortable in my apartment. But then I would think about those garbage bags, and the slippers, and the -22 degrees, and I would get back to work. The first thing I did was call 211, which is Ontario's social services helpline. I explained the situation and asked for a referral. They connected me with a legal clinic that specialized in elder law. I got an appointment for the following week. In the meantime, I asked my grandmother to write down everything she could remember: dates, conversations, amounts, documents she had signed, anything. I gave her a notebook and a pen, and she filled 12 pages over 4 days. Her handwriting was neat and precise. She remembered more than she thought she did. I also contacted the Advocacy Centre for the Elderly, which is a clinic in Ontario that provides free legal services specifically for older adults. When I explained what had happened to my grandmother, the unsigned financial arrangement on the house, the monthly transfers, the paperwork signed without independent counsel, the lawyer I spoke with was very clear. She said this was consistent with patterns they saw frequently. She used the term financial elder abuse. She said it out loud, without hesitation, and I appreciated that clarity because I had been dancing around those words in my own head for 2 weeks. She told me what our options were. She explained the process. She was honest that the $160,000 contribution was difficult to recover without documentation, but not impossible. The monthly transfers were more straightforward. There were bank records, there were checks, there was a paper trail if we looked for it. She also told me something I hadn't considered. She said I should contact my grandmother's bank and ask for copies of all statements going back 3 years. She said to do it soon, and to do it with my grandmother present, and to explain that we were conducting a financial review on her behalf. We did that the following Thursday. My grandmother and I went to the bank together. The branch manager was kind. We sat in her office, and she pulled up the account history and printed 3 years of statements. When we got home and I spread them across my kitchen table, I found something. For 14 months, starting around the same time as the house documents, there were automated transfers of $300 per month, going from my grandmother's account to an account I didn't recognize. These were in addition to the $900 checks. My grandmother had not set these up herself. She didn't know what they were. When I showed them to her, she went very quiet. The total was $4,200, transferred out of her account without her knowledge. I photographed every page of those statements. I saved the photos in 3 places. Then I called the elder law clinic back and reported what we had found. What happened next involved a formal complaint to the Ontario Human Rights Process and a separate referral to the Financial Crimes Unit of our local police division. I am not going to describe all of it in detail because some of it is still unresolved in ways I'm not able to discuss, but I will tell you that once I had a lawyer involved and a police report filed, things moved differently than they had when it was just a family disagreement about money. My uncle called me 11 days after my grandmother had appeared at my door. I didn't answer the first time. He left a voicemail that was calm and measured, and described the situation in a way that was almost unrecognizable to me. My grandmother had decided she wanted more independence. She'd always been welcome to leave. The house documents were standard estate planning. The transfers were for her share of household bills. I saved the voicemail. The second time he called, I answered. I let him talk. I didn't argue with anything he said. I asked 3 questions. Whether he had documents proving my grandmother had agreed to the automated transfers, whether he had records of what the $900 monthly payments had been used for, and whether he had any record of the original agreement regarding her $160,000 contribution to the house purchase. He told me this was a family matter, and I was making it into something it wasn't. I told him I was going to let the legal process determine that. He called my mother next. That was a harder conversation. My mother is not a bad person. She had not been aware of the details of what had been happening in that house. But she also had not asked. And when my uncle told her his version that I had gotten involved in something I didn't understand, that I was damaging the family, that my grandmother was being manipulated by me rather than by him, my mother wanted to believe that the simpler story was the true one. I sat with my mother at my kitchen table, the same place I had sat with my grandmother, and I showed her the bank statements. I showed her the automated transfers my grandmother had never authorized. I showed her the 12 pages my grandmother had written in her own hand. My mother read every word. She was silent for a long time afterward. Then she said, I should have paid more attention. I told her we could only move forward from where we were now. My grandmother had her own appointment with the elder law clinic, separate from mine, where she spoke to the lawyers without me present. This was important. This was actually one of the things the clinic insisted on, that my grandmother be able to speak for herself, with legal counsel, without any family member in the room. They needed to know that what she wanted was what she said she wanted, not what someone else wanted for her. What she said she wanted on her own, in that room, was accountability. She wanted the unauthorized transfers investigated. She wanted acknowledgement of her contribution to the house. She wanted to spend whatever years she had left living somewhere she felt safe and respected. She did not ask for an apology. She knew better than to expect one. The process took months. I won't pretend it was easy on any of us. There were weeks where my grandmother was exhausted and said she wished she had just let it go. There were weeks where I was exhausted and doubted everything. There were family dinners we did not attend, calls we did not return, a Christmas that was the quietest I had ever experienced. But there were also other things. There was the afternoon my grandmother and I repotted all her plants together, the ones I had rescued from the garbage bags and arranged along my south-facing windowsill. She told me about each one, where she had gotten it, how long she had had it, which ones her mother had originally grown. She talked for 2 hours. I had never heard any of these stories before. There was the Sunday phone call that was no longer a phone call because she was already here, and so instead we just had tea and watched the figure skating on television, and she told me who each skater was and what country they represented. And I realized she had been paying close attention to this sport her entire life, and I had never known. There was the moment, about 4 months after she had arrived, when she looked around my living room, her plants on the windowsill, her reading chair that I had bought secondhand and reupholstered, her good dishes that she had insisted on bringing, and she said, quietly, "This feels like mine." I told her it was. Here is what I want people to understand who are watching this. The $160,000 is still being negotiated. There are no guarantees about how much of it can be recovered. The unauthorized transfers were confirmed as unauthorized, and that investigation is ongoing. My uncle has not faced criminal charges yet. I am told that financial elder abuse cases are complex and take time, and that outcomes vary widely. I am not going to pretend the system worked perfectly or quickly or the way it should, But my grandmother is safe. She is warm. She has her plants and her reading chair. And her good dishes. She has not had to apologize to anyone for existing. She has not handed a single check to anyone since February. Her OAS and CPP go directly into her own account, which she manages herself, and I help her review it every month, not because she can't do it alone, but because she asked me to, and because it makes her feel secure. Last month, she started volunteering at the public library on Tuesday afternoons, helping with a program for kids learning to read. She comes home and tells me about the children. She glows when she talks about them. If you have an elderly parent or grandparent, and something feels off, the money, the access, the paperwork, the way they seem smaller than they used to be, please don't wait. Call 211 Inches Ontario. Contact the Advocacy Centre for the Elderly. Ask for the bank statements. Sit down with the person you love and ask them careful questions and write the answers down. You do not have to be a lawyer. You do not have to be certain. You just have to show up. I showed up at 6:15 inches the morning because my grandmother rang my doorbell in her slippers. She deserved someone to show up for her. She had been showing up for everyone else her entire life. The least I could do was open the door.